Today we're going to sort of expand on some of the stuff we talked about previously. I will do a quick rundown of what we went through before in case somebody's new, didn't go through that webinar in the past, and just to refresh your memory. And then we're going to look at some new and exciting stuff about the enterprise context. All right. So, same as last time, still haven't changed, still am who I am. My name is Mallory. I am the Director of Customer Success at Humanitech, software engineer turned cloud person. Long and exciting journey that has been, but feel free to connect with me, shoot me an email if you have questions, or reach out in the Platform Engineering Slack. The whole context of this particular presentation today actually comes out of questions that came from the last one about how to focus this in more on enterprise. So I decided we would come up with a way to go over this together and also to open up for your questions with the more enterprise context. So today we're going to, like I said, go through a few different things. The first thing is we're going to take a reminder of what is the minimum viable platform, how enterprise adoption differs as a whole, how we counter these adoption problems that we do often see inside enterprises, and then I'm actually going to show you a sample enterprise adoption plan, something we actually use here at Humanitech very regularly with our enterprise size customers in order to facilitate broad adoption of an IDP powered by Humanitech within their organizations. Like I said last time, doesn't have to have Humanitech at the middle. It's just this concept of taking platform engineering, scaling it in a way that makes sense and is logical and prevents a lot of the pitfalls that we see when people start putting these sorts of motions in place. So a reminder, same as last time, what is a minimum viable platform? It's the way to show the value of a platform engineering initiative very quickly. And the idea is that you take pioneering teams that lead the way and you build a simplified representative first version of your IDP in the context of like a hello world type scenario. The whole idea is to treat it like a product, which is one of the main tenets of platform engineering. So having a product like roadmap for iteration, growth, expansion, and adoption is going to be critical. It's important also to seek out influential stakeholders and get them on board really, really, really fast. Those are the people that are going to help you expand this thing, especially in an enterprise context. And one of the really important things about these MVPs is that you are avoiding having to win over every single team right away or adjacent team immediately. You get some time to grow it, which is super cool. As a reminder too, from a design perspective, we want these things to be representative. So they should be common scenarios. When you're doing this MVP, this first iteration, that should follow very basic infrastructure requirements around your most common applications. So we like to say 80% of your estate is able to use this as the scaffold for the base of how they use the platform. So basic application structure, a common example is that kind of 3-tier front end, back end data layer type system, basic ingress, basic DNS, all those fun things. It has to be repeatable. So think of it as a quick start for other applications that will come on board afterwards and allows you to get people onboarded very quickly. It should also be iterative. So the idea is that you can start really small, but think about the future. And I think when we get into the enterprise level of things, the way we approach it is really where I would say the big difference is. The way we think about iteration and the way we think about adoption is very, very different. The principles can still be used inside of smaller organizations, but it definitely makes our lives easier. The last thing is that it should be innovative. There's no point in doing this if it's just reinventing the wheel over and over again. Doing a minimum viable platform should be something that inspires people within your organization, not just undermining the way they feel, the way they do their job. It should be about making them try something different and making them excited to try that different thing. All right. So one of the things I talked about last time is some of the common problems we see when people start platform engineering initiatives. And I wanted to simplify this and put it in a different way, and how the best practices of what we do with these MVPs actually helps counteract those. So the first pitfall we often see is this rush into complexity, this full-on dive into making it as complex as possible and solve all of your problems right away. Embrace a continuous improvement mindset. This is the only way that you can really grow these things at scale without falling off a ledge. Start small, iterate, and grow. And we'll talk a bit more about that. One of the other pitfalls people make is that they just focus on tools, they focus on tech stack. They get too bundled up in the weeds of, well, we also have to do this and this and this, and we have to be able to bring in this tool and connect into this service. But really just start focusing on the idea of supported golden paths. You're going to track usage and adoption along these. So focus on that experience, not just for you as platform engineers, but also for the folks that are doing the application development as well. It's about that golden path experience. A thing we often see as well is that people build a platform that no one wants to use, and that is a real big waste of time and money. So to counteract this, it's important to focus on the user and the right level of the abstraction. Productivity, impact, and satisfaction are the things you need to think about when you decide to do abstraction. I said it last time and I'll say it again, abstract responsibly. Don't just do it for the sake of abstracting people. Make sure that the reason why you are adding that layer actually helps improve some pain point that that developer team or that platform engineering team has. Something we've also sort of talked about lately, and sort of as we started thinking about how do we discuss this in an enterprise context for you guys, is that we're seeing a lot of people that think developer experience is only for developers, not for other stakeholders. But the thing is when you really start looking at these, you're finding pioneers and these champions and building an entire community around this platform. A community that inspires innovation, that inspires forward thinking and trying new things. And it sort of changes the way your organization works. It sets up a different feeling and a different way of working for people that really do like to try and experiment with new technology. So that's really important. So like I said, the underlying principles are still the same. We still want to follow those key rules and avoid those pitfalls. But when we look at larger enterprises, things get a little bit different in adoption. And this is one of the great questions someone brought up last time that I wanted to make sure we address, because not every platform engineering initiative is in a small or medium-sized business. There are things that are different between SMBs and enterprises. When I say small to medium-sized business, I think of, teams that are much smaller than, let's say, 150, 200 developer individual contributors. That's kind of what we tend to think about as enterprise on our side, though there are exceptions to that rule. When you look at them in terms of some different evaluation criteria, and how we look at them in terms of how they approach certain problems, we look at some trends, and we've been able to sort of generalize as a rule of some different things that SMB versus enterprise fall into. So keep in mind, these are fairly general. This will not fit in all circumstances. This is just our observation. So we see in the technical complexity side that your SMBs are low to medium. This is generally because their requirements are much smaller, and they aren't going to have as many security requirements depending on what they're doing. They're not going to be as in-depth in terms of potentially multi-cloud or other requirements that pop up. Enterprises, on the other hand, extremely high. There are customers we work with that are deploying to 4 different cloud setups that are deploying to entirely unique security standpoints inside their platform. It's very, very different. They have a lot of different teams that do a lot of different things. So standardization starts kind of high and trickles down to different parts of the organization. And we'll look at that shortly too. And that becomes a bit of a challenge. In terms of organizational maturity, we see the SMBs at early stage or mid stage. So this is not just about technical complexity, but what does the engineering organization look like? How is it divided? In enterprise, you tend to get a high level of technical and org maturity. Things are usually broken up by stuff like business units or particular verticals within an organization, whereas on the SMB side, you sort of just have front-end, back-end engineers, and your QA people, and they all kind of exist inside the same org. We do see that split happen quite often. In terms of resource allocation, and this is actually, I think, one of the biggest differentiators we see going through these adoptions so often. Your SMBs have very minimal dedicated resources to building out platforms, and they're often split responsibility. So they might be doing other things at the same time. When it comes to enterprises, I will tell you that a majority of our Humanitech enterprise customers have actually had dedicated teams building out the MVP platform, modifying it for the specific use cases that come up, and maintaining it in the future. That is their job. It is specifically that IDP. And that is really, really important because that changes the way you can scale inside an org. Business initiatives are also something really important to look at. This one is very generalized, but I like to sort of separate it because it helps you define value stream very quickly. So for SMBs, I would say a lot of the time it's focused on growth and product. So let's get our product to where it has to be to get our Series C, or let's get our user base growing a lot so we have user data to modify our product, make it better to get to Series C. Enterprise, on their hand, different story. It's more about growth and profitability. So how can we get better to be more profitable and make our shareholders really happy? So that does often change the priorities of a business, and how engineering comes into that can vary quite a bit. We'll talk about that too. In terms of adoption timeframes, so I'm going to say for a majority of a particular company's estate to be onboarded onto a new platform, SMBs fairly fast. We've seen quite a few do less than 12 months. Sort of depends on their priorities, but it is generally very quick. For enterprise, though, you're looking at often more than a year, especially when you have a huge estate and a lot of complex technologies to bring into place. Stakeholder tie-in is also an important thing that sort of ties into everything else here. So when I say stakeholders, I mean your managers, your senior managers, your executives. In SMBs, these folks have a high involvement. They're more in the day-to-day. They understand exactly what's going on from the top down and see every sort of little piece of the organization, often as a general rule. In enterprise, they're involved at a really far distance. So there's a big gap between what a platform engineering team is working on and that CTO in most enterprise organizations. So that is also a really critical difference. The challenges we see that come up because of these differences, I'm just sort of summarizing here. So technical complexity is massively increased. The estate covers a lot more ground. I've already talked about that. I'm sure you guys know that. Very obviously is the case often with enterprise orgs. They also have a higher level of stakeholder management required for an entire organization to adopt a platform. It's not just about, a CTO signing off and approving something. When you're going at this scale, it is a lot more involved. And it must be well planned and well managed in order for that to work. They kind of also, as a general rule, the 20% of outliers tend to be some very critical components. So in smaller businesses, we think we can cover 80% of the estate fairly quickly, and that 20% you can work on as they come up. But often in enterprise organizations, those outliers, those kind of weird use cases are the ones that are very critical. So think of stuff like data computing. Think of stuff like high performance messaging or high performance transfer of data or information, things that are not 80% of the technical estate, but a very critical part of the business. In this case, we have to look at them very soon, sooner than later. The other thing that I think causes every single person a headache is legacy systems. In enterprises, they often haunt the estate. Enterprise organizations tend to have been around for a long time, probably before cloud native was a thing or early on when best practices weren't quite established. So this can cause some grief as you start thinking about how you're going to build adoption and expansion. So the high level TLDR of how we decided that we would challenge or counter these challenges and what we do to go against them is a couple things. We engage high level stakeholders about the value and ROI of these projects very, very early on. We encourage, obviously, our customer teams to do the exact same. We plan around technical complexity with a focused, phased project plan and roadmap. Sometimes they're not always called MVPs. Sometimes they get called lighthouses. Sometimes they get called pilots. It's whatever works best within the organization to give it the most context for what they're trying to achieve. One of the other things that's incredibly critical is having a strong aligned project management collaboration between the platform and application teams or the business unit teams, whatever that division might be. Also, like I said about that 20%, you have to start thinking about those outliers very early on. Build that migration strategy supporting their onboarding. The way we achieve this is by cyclical iteration. And I will show you what cyclical iteration in this context means in just a little bit. And finally, you're going to have to consider where legacy systems fit in and any initiatives that might be pulling an organization away from them. It is unfortunately something we all will have to think about at some point. I'm sure there are people here who have done exactly that. So I want to start with talking about these high-level stakeholders, these management, senior management, C-level folks that will need to be engaged in this process. The important thing is to think about outcome focused. Think that is the priority. Start early talking to these guys. Share the project plans you're working on with appropriate management, with defined success criteria and desired outcomes. I cannot tell you how many customers come to us early on in the process and have no idea how they're going to measure the success of their platform engineering initiative. It's actually really scary. Make sure that you set the standard for what that is inside of an enterprise organization. Some enterprises will have this already. They'll know this is a top-down initiative. We know how we're going to evaluate whether or not it's working. But if they don't, you may have to define that. And it's probably best to take suggestions and get feedback and correct rather than have nothing. Same with outcomes. These outcomes should be aligned with business priorities. So often you'll see things like time to market, revenue-driven priorities that become part of this process and are an element of driving that priority forward and hitting the goals that are expected to be achieved. When you're engaging with this level of stakeholder, it's really important to regularly have touch points with them. Talk specifically about success criteria and outcomes, including wins, team light bulb moments. So good team light bulb moment would be you're going into one of your first pioneer teams with your MVP platform, and all of a sudden you have a developer that says something like, I didn't realize it could actually be this easy to deploy an application, and I don't have to go through 30,000 steps just to get something into dev. Those are light bulb moments, and those are critical to share. Think about it like when you're asked to leave a Google review, what you write in the box. That's the light bulb moment that you would want to make sure that these folks see. It's important to focus less on the deeper technology. So maybe don't say, we integrated more advanced DNS and networking in this version, blah, 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 blah. Maybe it's more important instead to say, with the iterations we made at this stage, we were able to onboard this highly secure team, and this is the outcomes they are now seeing. So think of it that way. Schedule demos and updates as part of QBRs or other management level meetings. So some orgs do QBRs, quarterly business reviews. Some don't. Some allow for all hands demos. Some do regular reporting into upper level management about what each department is doing. Whatever that might be for you, get into those. And the last and probably the most important thing is show ROI as soon as you can see it. Time is money, and anything that can reduce time for common tasks is a big cost saver. As a general rule, golden paths tend to reduce a ton of time, which means that money is saved. And that's really, really important. You can also think of this in terms of uptime and security. Any time not wasted trying to fix uptime or security issues is a big cost savings. One of the other things that I mentioned is that your PM strategy needs to be aligned, and it also should be aligned with your migration plan. So having project management strength means that your teams on both sides, so let's say your application side and your platform side, they work together really well. And if you don't have this, if you don't have alignment here, you will fail. These adoptions fail when project management does not work together and have the same alignment on outcomes, goals, objectives. They collaborate on the timelines, the phases, overcoming blocks that happen. They have to work together, and that is an incredibly critical thing. So don't forget that. It's also important, obviously, for smaller scale projects and MVPs, but really, really critical when you are going across a huge organization. The other thing that's important is building migration plans. So the best projects that we see are ones that start with a solid plan to begin with. They consider what logical time is going to be required to bring on new applications or whole teams. It considers how the technical complexity of the platform has to change in parallel with that onboarding. Having that from the very start or very early on, at least some form of it, is really important. So the best way I like to think about it is in iteration cycles for each cohort or group of teams or applications or business units, whatever it is that you bring on board. So think about it cyclically. Last, legacy services. We'll touch on this really quick. So you're going to have to do a little bit more thinking about this as a technical organization, and this may not fall on the platform team. Some enterprises have a plan for replacing these things, some don't. If you are, as part of an org that is planning on a gradual sunsetting and replacement of legacy, start any new project. So let's say you're refactoring to a modern model or a modern application type, start it greenfield on a new platform. Be the best practice pioneers from absolute day one with these new rebuilt applications. It's a really easy win to show how quickly things can move along. So actually day zero, as the team starts working on replacing this legacy component by starting to build something new, start by deploying it through your IDP immediately. It is pretty cool to watch these greenfield projects just take off in this way. If, however, legacy services have to remain, which they do in a lot of circumstances, just know that they are never going to align with platform engineering philosophy or fit into the 12-factor app model in the way they currently are. So the way I like to think of this is that's not a loss. Eventually, when the rest of the organization is on this beautiful IDP, time is saved, money is saved, everyone's happy, it's sunshine and rainbows. It is actually possible that you could bring up a sunsetting plan to get rid of these things because there's actually more time and more engineering effort able to be focused on refactoring legacy applications, which is actually really cool. We have seen this with a couple of customers, mostly in the finance sector, where there is still a ton of legacy stuff that is frightening and running on mainframes and all sorts of things you probably don't want to think about. And they can actually start moving towards working on new, exciting versions of these things that are actually modern and sunsetting the old, which is very cool. So this is the fun part. I'm going to show you now a sample MVP/pilot adoption plan for a large-scale enterprise. This is sort of taken from a couple different ones we have done here at Humanitech, and in a couple of these circumstances, they were actually called pilots. Again, I don't really care what you call it. Just use the philosophy underneath all of this and drive it forward in that way. Some folks just like to call it things like pilot to make it sound cooler. This is the cyclical model that I'm talking about, and I think enterprise adoption has to work cyclically. Small, medium business adoption can work this way as well, but when you break things down into logical phases and cycles, it makes a lot more sense for a bigger organization than, just sort of trickling in application by application. So we have to start thinking a little bit bigger. And when you think bigger, cycles make the most sense. At the very beginning, you're going to assess and as a platform team, make recommendations. So basically design your platform around developer needs, best practices, which we're talking about here, and your existing tool chain. So what you happen to do after that is you move into this MVP or pilot program. This is the baseline and proving grounds for what you are trying to achieve. Next, you're going to bring on your new adopters. So these are the first folks that are going to start coming back in. So we call this seed and scale. You're planting the seeds for additional growth, and you're starting to scale as the seeds grow. Over time, you will have to add new features because that's just the way these things work. You're evolving and supporting the platform to support the teams that you have coming on. Part of that also leads into this process of evolution from feedback and prioritization, and it is just a loop as you onboard more and more organizations inside of your larger org. So that is actually what we see happening quite a bit, is this very cyclical run of onboarding new parts of an org. So, you may start with, let's just say, a whole front-end organization. And then logically after that, it makes sense to prepare the platform to take on the back-end part of your engineering organization. And then you have to make changes for that. Once back-end is in, then there's data management. Okay, that's the logical next step. Let's work on that. And that is really the most effective way to bring these things through to the end. This is another really cool example that I wanted to show you from our customer success team that we worked on, just as a really, really high level example of what the actual MVP could look like to get someone to enterprise grade and production ready within 90 days. When we say production ready, we kind of talk about a customer being able to go to production, not that they actually are. It's sort of their choice, but we want to enable them to get there within this 90-day frame. So you can see how we've broken this down. You'll have to forgive my terrible line art skills. Not my strong suit, I'm afraid, but do the best I can. So you'll see what we're actually doing, breaking our activities down with our customers, and this is actually how they will also manage their projects. So we start with pre and post activities. These are sort of your planning stages. You may remember from the last webinar how we had the first week was very planning focused and the post phase was also very planning focused and philosophy focused. Same thing here. Inside of this, you're going to find these core MVP activities in approximately 45 days. So we have the MVP pilot going for 2 different applications. So we're basically spending a few weeks on each of them, getting them onboarded and running, then moving on to the next one. We also are going to break it down into building more advanced components that lead us towards being production ready at enterprise. So we're going to spend a good sprint cycle doing dynamic infrastructure integrations, another doing the security requirements, CI/CD and environment optimizations, and then finally the golden path optimizations once we actually get a good amount of user feedback. At the end of that, we'll sit down and talk about that cyclical evolution that I showed you earlier. What is that going to look like? Are you going to be an all-in from the start? Everyone has to migrate. We're just going to put everyone in a line. Are you going to be more let the pioneers lead the way and start shouting from the rooftops about how exciting this is? Or are you going to be more business unit focused? So are you going to start with that front end org, get them really going well, move into the back end org? What does that plan look like? It's really, really important. And along the way, you're going to be showing the success, and you're also going to be talking about the key learnings, as well as what is driving the outcomes to leadership to get them also very excited. So that is it for the informational portion of what I have today. It is now question and answer time, which is always the most exciting. So I will stop my screen sharing here and bring good old moderator Maria back into things.
Thank you, Mallory. Thank you for sharing the insights. And I agree with you. That's the most interesting part. Let's jump into questions. Is there a size of startup that is too small for a platform?
I think it's a good question. So on our side, like we obviously have a bit of a bias for our particular product. We really see Humanitech successful at scale. So teams kind of bigger than 15, it's where it starts getting really, really effective. But one of the things to think about when you start thinking about platform engineering is, where do we experience bottlenecks? And if we experience a ton of bottlenecks sort of in that process of requesting resources, or that process of deployment or rollback or environment promotion, whatever those sort of day-to-day things are, that's when you probably need to start thinking about it. Can you think about it from day 0? Absolutely. From a single developer team, a single person starting an app in their basement? Absolutely, you can. You just have to have tooling that is appropriate for scale. And that's really important. From the start, you may just have a very basic platform for yourself. You may just have a very basic kind of rundown of automations that work for you. But as you scale and add more members to your team, you're going to start finding bottlenecks. And that's when it's really critical to start going from there.
Well, curious about your perspective on minimum viable platform, specifically for ML product teams, orgs. Are there particular snags you see? Do you feel the scope of your presentation covers product, I guess, machine learning or otherwise?
Sorry, what was the vertical? It cut out just a second there.
Machine learning.
Machine learning. Well, machine learning requires a ton of data processing. So I try to think of that as, I know we've got a few AI customers now, and sort of the way they tend to break it up is obviously there's like an interface component. If there is an interface to that application, if there's not, then you're going to start trying to break it down by the data layers that you have to go through. So we see with our AI customers that there's some actual data layering that happens, and I would probably start with the most intense of the data layering systems, kind of that bottom layer, that layer that does the most work, and then start scaling from there. Not to say you should start with the most complex situation, but I think when you start at the bottom of that complexity pyramid in that circumstance, it's probably the right way to go. It's at least going to get you, a bit more streamlined on the more complicated side of things. And in terms of like API products are another good example. API products, the best case for onboarding to a platform in that is actually to also just go by component or go by section. So maybe you're just going to get So if you're, let's say you're a trading API, you're a market data API, you might start first with the team that works on just grabbing the data and being able to just output it as it exists from the stock market, for instance. Then the next team you might go work with is the one that actually processes and does something with that data. And then the third one might actually be just the folks that work on the user side of things. What does the user component look like of that API product? So there's a lot of different ways you can break it down. Just think about how your groups can be simplified.
And that also relates to the golden path, right? For the machine learning platforms. It's
Yeah.
just around
Machine learning
getting
is very different, but it can still follow these things.
nice. Cool. Next question. What typically fits into the first and second minimum viable products? Well, in this case, platforms.
Yeah, so what we do in those two, so the most recent one we did, for instance, that first one is one application or one application group. So it may be the data gathering component, for instance, of a trading application. I'll just use that because I came from one before I came here, and it's what's in my brain right now. It may be the data gathering component that comes first, and then we'll get that rolling really, really well. We'll get that team set up. And then we'll use them as a demo towards the next team. And then the next team goes, aha, let's do that. And then we bring them on. So effectively what we do is start with one. So we start with one use case, then move on to the next use case. That's almost like an evolved iteration of that first one, and use that to sort of prove out the whole system. And generally those first few, I mean, you could do 3, you could do 4, should be fairly representative of what the rest of the engineering org looks like.
So for Humanitech, have you tested with very large enterprises, 10,000s of engineers?
Yes. I can't tell you who, but yes, we have. It's fun. It's really fun to do those and the way they break things up. So some of them are broken up in terms of like teams we work with. So we actually work with smaller teams within a bigger organization, and we consider them almost separate customers. When you go to that tens of thousands scale, what often happens is business units work entirely independently of each other. What happens on infrastructure on one side is probably different than another. There's likely some alignment, but chances are they don't share resources. They might just have some sort of like top-down playbook of here's what you do, here's the database types we like you to use, here's a menu that you can pick from. Or here's an approved list of vendors to work with. Like that is something that happens. If they share resources, it's a different story for us. Yes, then that is all of them kind of under one Humanitech customer, for lack of a better word, organization. But generally with those big guys, we actually see them broken into smaller chunks from a customer perspective.
Yeah. How would you approach a global enterprise that didn't have a platform, surviving with legacy tools, and want to implement a platform without disturbing production, maintaining support to legacy?
Yeah, so we actually did this very recently. And the way that you do this is you maintain your legacy system as is. You can do a couple of things with that. Sometimes legacy systems with Humanitech, for example, can connect in on static resources, and you can leave those running and they can go well and they can do what they need to do. Maintenance can be as required, or if there's a downtime or an error. What you do in the background is you start rebuilding those legacy systems in that 12-factor app framework, or you build it in that more modern application design concept. I've seen teams get divided into, okay, team A, you're doing maintenance on the legacy stuff and keeping it alive to make sure we have, money to keep the lights on while we rebuild this thing in the background. Generally, what we see when that does happen, and what we just saw, was it went piece by piece by piece by piece. Not all at once, just component by component, service by service. It's the smartest way to do that.
Start small, guys. Cool. As an IT consulting company, how can I help customers start with platform engineering?
I think you have to find a way to get them excited about it. And I think the easiest way is to show them what platform engineering as a philosophy can do. We have tons and tons of great material on the platformengineering.org side, not just from folks like me, but folks from companies that have done it and been there. to really get people excited about what this philosophy offers. And then in terms of, actual outcomes and use cases on the Humanitech side, we also have them. Even if you don't look at Humanitech, you can look at what happens when you take platform engineering philosophy and apply it organization-wide. I think you just have to inspire people to get excited about it. Find that team that might want to try something a little different and talk to them about doing that MVP. Knowledge is power, and sharing things around and being poke, poke, nudge, nudge, look at this cool thing always helps.
You just gotten started with building a platform at my enterprise. In the future, if we need any guidance in terms of building a successful platform or creation, more adoption, how can we reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Platform engineering Slack, like Maria mentioned earlier, you should join that. I'm in there. I occasionally snoop around it, sometimes respond, mostly just lurk, career lurker right here. The other thing you can do is reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to kind of talk people through what they're going through, how that adoption is maybe failing versus winning, what you can take out of it and keep doing really well, or what you can improve. We can always talk about that.
Nice. And I'm putting my laptop closer. When the platform involving the implementation of Kubernetes was one of the big three as provider, and there is 8 to 9 Spring Boot microservices, what could be the MVP of internal developer platform?
In any multi-cloud case, I would suggest your MVP starts with one of them. Don't go all three at once. And then your iterative steps will be moving towards each additional cloud provider. It does depend on how you do your deployments. Are you deploying the same thing to each provider, or does one of them handle something specific versus the other? But generally, I would only start with one. Don't overcomplicate it. It is easier to show how useful a platform is when you just start very simple. And if you just start immediately trying to run head on into all three, are they that different? No, they aren't. They aren't even that different to integrate, to be honest with you, but you want to make sure you're focusing on just delivering that golden path and that value very quickly. And you can even say when you demo this stuff, like, look, multi-cloud is very simple for us to do, but right now we wanted to just show you very quickly what we can do. And this is how our multi-cloud would work. That's what I would do.
Nice. I see in the chat, someone asks how we can get the invitation to the Slack platform engineering. So you guys can join, just click the link over there, and I posted it in the everyone's chat, so everyone can join in and become a cool group of platform engineers and platform practitioners, as I like to say. Next question. Scenario, 80% of apps are legacy and will remain. They will be migrated from an obsolete environment to a modern environment. Can your approach add value?
Absolutely. Even if you don't make them a 12-factor app, even if you don't deploy them into Kubernetes, at the end of the day, you can think about using the scenarios and the principles here to treat your environments, treat your developer ecosystem like a product. Make it work for them. Take feedback, iterate, have a roadmap. Every kind of step here, it's not just specific to, A, Humanitech, or B, even, your Kubernetes deployed cloud native application. I personally, in my own projects, have tried to implement these principles into how I design and build and deploy. Or, when we've chatted to folks in that scenario, we've even said to them, look, here's the philosophy that can guide you. Whether, like, is it exactly 100% applicable because you're not going to do things the 12-factor way, legacy will stay legacy, that's fine. But the principle's still there. If you're migrating, do it gradually. If you're trying to improve a system as you are migrating legacy stuff, think of it as a product. Same stuff.
Next question. I'm looking forward to Mallory's explanation because I really like hers. In your opinion, how platform engineering is different compared to recent new methodologies, philosophies like Agile, Scrum, DevOps, MVP, Lean, product thinking, design thinking?
I mean, they're all kind of different and they all serve different purposes. So when you think of like Agile as a product management framework can be the project management framework you choose to use here. Um, you really have, I think, I almost don't want to brand platform engineering as its own thing because I think what it actually is just logic applied very intelligently. I think this is probably because I've been in it now for a while, but basically the way I think about it is it's well, why didn't I think of that? Of the cloud native space or of the application development space. It's oh, well, that's actually really simple. Should have just been doing that for 15 years. It's that hindsight kind of wishful thinking that platform engineering offers. I think we've just put a name to what people have wanted to be able to call stuff like DevOps. I have done a presentation and I'm now the face of DevOps is dead. Don't know how that happened, but here I am. You can go watch that because I think it will kind of give you an idea of what separates those two things. At the end of the day, you can still call it DevOps. DevOpsIsDead.com is actually also a link you can go to. You should check it out. There's some cool merch there. But Maria can post a link to the actual talk. In reality, it's about just thinking about process in a way that is friendly to humans. I think that's probably the best way to summarize it. And you can fit it in with all these different things. You can bundle it with Agile. You can bundle it with, you can bundle it even with traditional DevOps. You can bundle it with ClickOps. You can bundle it with, you could be like old school me and bundle it with very simple application development for a single person. It can be used in all sorts of contexts.
Nice. Not a question, but more of a comment. I find it difficult to reconcile the suggestion of a quick start like Hello World and still be innovative and design the platform for the end user from the start. The expectation of stakeholders are usually way higher than MVP.
Yep, they are. But the important thing to remember, and when I go talk to a C-level team at a company that is trying humanitech, and let's say a lot of the time what we're getting is these initiatives start very small. So there's one team that's kind of playing around with this idea. They come to us, we get them set up with this and then start them expanding. When I go talk to C-level, I say, look, you have a problem, and your problem is that it currently takes you 13 weeks to get something from, I don't know, to get a ticket from planning to production. 13 weeks. We have a way to reduce this significantly, and we have a way to make it easier for people to do their job, to get you value faster. When we start talking about outcomes is really where that aligns. So the expectations can be quite high from an outcomes perspective, but it's easy to start aligning things with expectations, and it's often about outcomes. So we like to often say, when we start a project, we like to say, okay, so what is the baseline time for a ticket to get from, assignment to production? How long does that take you? How long does it take you to spin up a new service? How long does it take you when something fails to fix it? When your app goes down, how long does it take? What does that process look like? Sometimes we even have customers will show us like, here's a process that we do that we really absolutely hate. We hate how complex it is. We hate that we have this like awful way of doing things. That is the stuff that you can say, look, this is what can change. Don't think about it just from technical complexity, because when you show something simple, and often when people can see it in practice compared to the old way, that is where people get interesting. One of the really cool ways that we often see customers test humanitech against, let's say, something they built themselves is like a bake-off. So they'll try to do the same task, get the same outcome. So deploy something to development. All right, cool. How long does that take with the old way? How long does it take with humanitech in place? That is what you want to show them. not the technical complexity is not the problem. That can come, and it's easy to sort of talk that stuff, talk those things off the ledge. It's very much about like, yes, let's work together on what this thing needs to be iteratively. And we've even had customers be like, yeah, if you want it to look like that, we need more resources. And then they get it. So it's also kind of a fun way to get more resources on a platform team.
Nice. And also, Austin asked a valid question. Is it your responsibility as platform lead to reach a compromise on stakeholder expectations versus business value? Also to
That's a good question. I think it's a shared responsibility, but it really would depend on how your org works. I think compromise is effective teamwork. We've had MVPs where the customer has said, look, like we really need to include this in V0. Like we absolutely have to have like 2 different cloud providers. We absolutely do. And then we go, okay, we need to be realistic on what we can achieve in the time we have. Here's how we can compromise to make that work. I think it goes both ways.
Nice. And the last question that I see, as a solo developer launching an MVP for my startup ordering app being used by 2 very busy restaurants, how critical is security and what specific aspects should I prioritize for an MVP?
Well, I'm not a security expert. You don't want to see the applications I built myself 10 years ago. Not good. Please don't ever visit them online. Not a security expert, but what I would always recommend is, check the rules and regulations for data protection in your region. So Europe has GDPR. It's very important that you are GDPR compliant from a data security standpoint. And also, yeah, protect your customers' data, protect their customers' data. That's integral. But from application development security, it's not my area of expertise. I am but a simple PHP developer that migrated to Go by force. So not my design strength, but I would definitely say data protection is very, very critical. And when it comes to us talking about hardening infrastructure with customers, we very much work closely with their security teams. As a single developer, you're not going to have that, but it may be worth getting a security consultant in to look at your applications and say, hey, there's tons of bug finding / security hole finding like companies out there that will go through your stuff and try and break it and try to find security flaws and give you a good rundown of what you need to fix and how to fix it.
Nice. How do you approach designing a platform when trying to minimize the number of services? Do you take a conservative approach to tooling versus building yourself? How do you weight the cost versus benefit of either?
I mean, you're asking someone that works at a SaaS company. That's I'm always gonna have bias there, but I would always say when it comes to the build versus buy argument, you're not Google, you are not Amazon. If someone does something and it checks your boxes for what it needs to do and provides you the outcomes you are looking to get and is easier for you to set up than for you to do it yourself, or at least if you look at the time and money that it would require you to actually build similar functionality, go with the SaaS product, go with the service. We really often have to say to people like, look, you're not Google. I know you want to be, but you're not. And until you're Google, you might need to use this to at least get you to this point. We've been doing this for 8 years now. Humanitech has been doing this. We've built a lot in that 8 years, and we've learned a lot. We've learned the things that you now don't have to learn because we went through them. We made the mistakes. We fixed it. I've always said it's expertise. So like I wouldn't hire an electrician to do my plumbing, and I certainly would not do my plumbing myself. Could I? I could probably figure it out. YouTube exists, but should I? Probably not.
And with that note, I don't see any other questions. So we'll send over the webinar replay and slides to everyone who joined today. Also, I saw there was some difficulties joining Slack, but I think all good now. If in case the link doesn't work, just go to platformengineering.org and there is big button join Slack, and it will definitely guide you to the right direction. If you want to reach out to Mallory, you know where to find Mallory, and yeah, we'll send over the reply and slides to everyone tomorrow morning latest. And yeah, Mallory, any final words? I feel like you can summarize it nicely into, go kids and do.
Go kids, be free, platform engineer. No, thank you everyone for joining. I think it's nice to sort of iterate on what we've already done. Looking forward to sharing some more stuff with you in the future. But otherwise, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Amazing. Thank you for joining, and see you guys next week. We host these webinars every week, so feel free to check out all the next ones at the platformengineering.org. And thank you, Mallory, for
No worries.